"You can watch from home. The wedding is for blood relatives only," my father said. So I did. I sat alone, staring at the screen, feeling the sting of being excluded. But what happened next wasn't something I could have ever imagined. The live stream froze at the exact moment chaos erupted. The bride screamed. Glass shattered. The perfect picture of a wedding shattered in an instant. And then, in that frozen moment, I saw it. My fiancé, Thomas, sitting with my father, looking as if he belonged there. But that wasn't the worst part. What I saw next would change everything I thought I knew about my family. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a carefully crafted lie. One that would tear them apart and destroy everything they had built on deception. I had always been the outsider, the one excluded. But what I saw on that live stream wasn't just my rejection, it was the unraveling of their perfect little world. Stick with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm 32 years old, a graphic designer by trade, and until recently, I thought I had made peace with being forgotten. I live alone in a modest apartment in Chicago, the kind with creaky floors and a coffee shop downstairs that knows my order before I speak. My life is quiet, simple, and solitary by choice, or so I used to tell myself. I worked hard to build stability out of the chaos I came from. But there are wounds that no amount of routine or success can cover. My story doesn't begin at my sister's wedding. It begins nearly 2 decades earlier, when I was just 14. That was the year everything shifted. My parents' marriage had always been tense. But I never imagined my father would walk out without even a backward glance. He left my mother and me as if shedding a skin he no longer wanted to wear. No warning, no apology, just a new woman, a new life, and silence. Her name was Stephanie. She was younger than my father by 15 years. Confident, polished, and sharp, in a way my mother never had been. I remember seeing her once through the window of my father's car, her hair perfect, her laugh effortless. She looked like someone from a magazine, the kind of woman who could make a man forget he ever had a past. And in many ways, that's exactly what she did. My father remarried quickly, and just as quickly, I became a ghost in his new life. Phone calls stopped. Holidays passed without a card or even a text. When I did see him, once every few years, always in a neutral location, he spoke to me with the strained politeness of a man speaking to a distant cousin. There was no warmth, no curiosity about who I was becoming. I stopped trying to impress him. I stopped trying to earn what he had decided I no longer deserved. Then came Natalie. Stephanie gave birth to my half-sister a year after the wedding. From the photos I saw online and the stories my grandmother reluctantly shared, Natalie was everything my father could want in a daughter: smart, pretty, accomplished. She played piano, attended private school, smiled brightly in every family photo that never included me. While I was working nights to help my mother pay bills, Natalie was having birthday parties with ponies and catered brunches. She didn't replace me so much as erase me. As I got older, I told myself that it was okay, that I didn't need them. I poured myself into school, then work, and then into a carefully crafted life with no room for hurt. I stopped reaching out, I stopped hoping, and eventually I stopped caring, or so I thought. Then he met Thomas. He was charming in a quiet, steady kind of way. A tech guy with soft eyes and a calming presence, the kind of man who listened when you spoke and remembered the smallest details. We met at a networking event. I was presenting a rebrand project I'd done for a local nonprofit. He was scouting design talent for his startup. We hit it off almost instantly. Within 6 months, we moved in together. It felt safe. It felt like something I could finally count on. Thomas never asked much about my family. He knew they were distant. He never pushed. That was something I appreciated at first. But as time went on, the silence around that part of my life became heavier. It hovered between us during quiet dinners and lazy Sundays. I told myself that maybe it was better this way, that I had carved out a new family, one I chose. Still, every now and then, something would remind me. A father and daughter laughing in the park. A wedding invitation in the mail from someone I barely knew. A voicemail from an old neighbor saying she ran into my dad and he looked great. These moments chipped away at the wall I'd built, but I kept patching it back up. I didn't talk about my mother much either. She passed when I was 26. Cancer. Quick and cruel. My father didn't come to the funeral. He sent flowers, though. Lilies, her least favorite. I remember standing there, reading the card signed Richard and Family, and wondering if he even knew she was allergic to lilies. After Mom died, it felt like the last thread tethering me to him had snapped. I was truly alone, and for a long time I told myself that was a strength. I didn't need them. I had my work, my apartment, and eventually, Thomas. But when the invitation came, an email from Natalie, addressed formally, almost coldly, something inside me shifted. She was getting married. It was a grand affair, at a private vineyard in upstate New York. The email included a note from my father. Due to limited space, we've decided to keep the guest list to immediate family only. You can watch from home via livestream. That single sentence did more than sting. It reopened everything I thought I had buried. Because for the first time in years, I wanted to be there. Not for him, not even for her, but for myself. I wanted to see where I stood. I wanted to know if, after everything, I still had a place. So, I watched. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was just curious. That it was just another wedding. And I was fine. But when the video froze and the screaming began, when glass shattered and faces twisted in panic, I saw something that changed everything. Not just a mistake. Not just a betrayal. A secret. One I was never supposed to see. And that's when everything began to unravel. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning. It was tucked between a spam ad for vitamin supplements and a reminder from my bank about a statement I never read. The sender's name made my stomach clench before I even opened it. Natalie Williams. My half-sister. The one who grew up in the house that used to be mine. The one who had everything I didn't. I hadn't heard from her in over a year, maybe more, and even then, it had only been a forwarded Christmas e-card with no personal message. And yet, here she was in my inbox, her name glowing like a ghost from a world I no longer belonged to. The subject line read, "Wedding Livestream Details." I stared at it for a moment, trying to make sense of the strange pairing of words. I clicked it open. "Hi, Rebecca. Hope you're doing well. Just wanted to pass along the information for the live stream, in case you'd like to join us virtually. We're keeping the in-person ceremony small, just close family. Thanks for understanding. Best, Natalie." Attached was a digital invitation, complete with vineyard-themed calligraphy and gold leaf accents. The names Natalie Grace Williams and Zachary Cole Anderson danced across the top in looping fonts. Below that, in a smaller, italicized note. Due to limited capacity, the couple has chosen to include only immediate family members and blood relatives in the in-person celebration. Thank you for your support and love. And then, as if to twist the knife, a final forwarded message from my father himself. It was short, efficient, cold. "Rebecca, you can watch from home. The wedding is for blood relatives only. Dad." I didn't move, not for a long time. The cursor blinked at me as if it were waiting for a response, as if I might type something in return. But there was nothing to say. What words could I offer when the message had been so clear? I closed my laptop and stood by the window. Outside, the world carried on, cars past, a dog barked across the street, someone watered their plants on the balcony below. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary morning. But inside, my chest was tight with a silence that wasn't ordinary at all. I wanted to believe it was about space, logistics, that maybe the venue truly couldn't accommodate more guests, that maybe, despite the hurt, it wasn't personal. But I knew better. My father was wealthy. He could rent out an entire estate if he wanted. This wasn't about space. This was about exclusion. It was the tone that got to me. Not just Natalie's passively polite wording, but my father's blunt dismissal. "You can watch from home." As if that were some kind of generous offering. As if I should be grateful for the chance to watch from a distance. And then that phrase, "blood relatives only." The words repeated in my mind like a taunt. I was his daughter, his only biological child. Natalie was the half. And yet, here he was, drawing a line in the sand that placed me on the outside. It didn't make sense, at least not on the surface. But the more I thought about it, the more something else began to stir in me. This wasn't just about family dynamics. This wasn't just Stephanie pushing me out, or Natalie wanting a clean guest list. No, this felt strategic, purposeful. My father had never been a warm man. But he was calculating. He never did anything without a reason. And this? This felt like a move on a chessboard, a deliberate removal of a piece he no longer needed in play. The memory of that forwarded message burned in my mind. He hadn't even sent it directly. He'd let Natalie be the messenger, then added a note at the bottom like an afterthought. Not, "We'd love to have you watch." Not, "I'm sorry it has to be this way." Not even, "Hope you're well." Just cold, distant instruction. The more I sat with it, the more questions started to rise. Why was he so determined to keep me away? What was he trying to control? Was there something he didn't want me to see? Or someone? I found myself scrolling through social media, half out of reflex, half out of a growing hunger for clarity. Natalie's engagement photos were everywhere, her in a white dress, laughing. Zachary looking every bit the all-American groom. My father appeared in several shots, beaming with pride, his arm around her as if she were his one and only child. Stephanie, too, always close, always perfect. There were no photos of me, of course, no mention that he had another daughter. I didn't exist in their version of the story. I hadn't for a long time. But now, for the first time in years, I didn't just feel forgotten. I felt erased. An erasure comes with a different kind of sting, one that seeps into your bones and makes you question whether you were ever real to them at all. I went back to the email and stared at it again. My first instinct had been to delete it, to ignore the entire thing and go on with my life. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to know why. I clicked the link. A new tab opened, and there it was. A countdown timer to the live stream. 10 days. 10 days until Natalie's perfect day. 10 days until I was expected to watch from the sidelines, smiling through a screen, as if that would ever be enough. I bookmarked the page. Whatever reason they had for keeping me away, I wanted to find out. Because this wasn't just a wedding. It was a message. And I intended to read it all. The 10 days leading up to the wedding crawled by, each one thick with tension I couldn't explain. Ever since I opened that email, something had shifted, not just in how I saw my family, but in how I saw the life I'd built with Thomas. At first, I chalked it up to stress. The past was resurfacing, old wounds reopening, and I assumed that maybe I was just more sensitive than usual. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized the change wasn't only inside me. Thomas was changing too. He had always been steady, consistent, the kind of man who asked about my day even when his was worse, who remembered what kind of tea I drank when I was sick. But that version of him had slowly started to fade. He was distracted, abrupt, glued to his phone. Conversations between us felt clipped, like I was talking to someone halfway out the door. I asked if everything was okay. He smiled too quickly and said it was just work. A launch coming up. A round of funding to secure. Nothing unusual. But I knew his rhythms, and this wasn't one of them. One night, 4 days before the wedding, I heard him on the phone in the living room while I was brushing my teeth. His voice was low, urgent, the kind of tone people use when they're trying not to be overheard. I paused, toothbrush in hand, and listened. I couldn't hear much at first, just a few stray phrases. "No, she doesn't know," he said. Then a pause. "Yes, I'll be there early, before the rehearsal dinner." I froze. He wasn't supposed to be attending the wedding at all. At least, that's what he'd told me. He had acted as surprised and indignant as I was when I showed him the email. Even said he'd skip his own friend's bachelor party out of solidarity. But here he was, planning to be there before the rehearsal dinner. I rinsed my mouth and stepped quietly into the hallway, moving closer to the edge where I could hear better without being seen. The next voice I heard stopped me cold. It was my father's. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. They were talking about property investments, a vineyard acquisition, potential licensing for a hospitality expansion. My father was giving Thomas numbers, projections, timelines. It was the kind of conversation you'd expect between longtime business partners, not between a protective father and his daughter's boyfriend. And certainly not between two men who, as far as I'd been told, barely knew each other. Thomas's voice dropped again. She still thinks she's out of the loop because of the wedding stuff. She hasn't asked questions. My blood ran cold. I stepped back, quietly enough not to make noise, but quickly enough to put a wall between me and what I had just heard. I didn't confront him that night. I couldn't. I didn't even know what to say. My mind was racing in too many directions. What exactly was Thomas involved in with my father? How long had this been going on? And more importantly, was I just collateral in whatever this arrangement was? The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek, told me he had back-to-back meetings, and left his coffee half-drunk on the counter. I watched him walk out the door and wondered if he'd always been playing a role I didn't notice until now. If so, he'd been good at it. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was just business. Maybe my father had reached out to Thomas independently, trying to make amends in his own twisted way. But the more I replayed the conversation in my head, the harder it was to believe that. There had been familiarity in their voices, confidence, and something else too, control. I began to sift through my memory for anything I might have missed. Times Thomas had asked about my family. Times he'd deflected when I brought up my childhood, or my father. There had always been a level of detachment I'd dismissed as politeness, but now it felt calculated. He never spoke ill of my father, never encouraged me to repair the relationship, but never pushed me to walk away either. He simply existed in a neutral space, and I had filled in the rest with trust. That night, I opened Thomas's laptop while he was in the shower. I hesitated at first. I had never gone through his things before. But something told me this wasn't about jealousy or paranoia. This was about something deeper, something rotten. Most of his files were clean client decks, code folders, pitch documents, but tucked inside a folder labeled Archive was a file that stood out, RW Holdings Preliminary Report. I opened it. Inside was a presentation draft with financial projections, land appraisals, and a slide with an image of the vineyard where Natalie's wedding was set to take place. At the bottom, in small text, partnership between RW Holdings and T. Evans Ventures, pending post, event negotiation. T. Evans. Thomas Evans. My stomach turned. This wasn't just business. This was a partnership, a plan. And from the timing and language, it looked like the wedding itself was tied to the deal, like it was being used as part of a larger strategy. I closed the laptop just as the water stopped running. When he stepped out, towel slung around his waist, he smiled and asked if I wanted to order Thai or Italian for dinner. I said I wasn't hungry. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Whatever was going on between Thomas and my father, it wasn't something I had been meant to know. And yet, there I was, right in the middle of it, uninvited to my sister's wedding, but somehow essential to the very deal that followed it. The realization sank in slowly, then all at once. I wasn't just being excluded. I was being managed. The morning of the wedding arrived with an eerie stillness. Outside my apartment window, the city moved on as usual. Delivery trucks backing into alleys, neighbors walking dogs, kids yelling as they raced bikes past each other. But I couldn't seem to hear any of it. All I could hear was the echo of Thomas's voice from nights before, and the hollow thud of my own heartbeat as I opened my laptop. The wedding was scheduled to begin at noon New York time. I clicked the link embedded in Natalie's email, and a video window opened on the screen, displaying a polished still image of the vineyard estate where the ceremony would take place. A countdown ticked away in the corner. 10 minutes. I stared at it like it might blink and disappear. Part of me hoped it would. I'd barely spoken to Thomas that morning. He left early, saying he needed to grab coffee and clear his head. I didn't ask where he was going. After the discoveries I'd made, his words meant less than his absence. I watched the door close behind him and resisted the urge to follow. If he was going to the wedding, I'd know soon enough. When the stream finally went live, Soft classical music played as the camera panned over manicured hedges, white chairs arranged in tight rows, and a floral arch bursting with pink and ivory roses. A young man in a suit adjusted a microphone stand. Guests drifted in, dressed in summer linens and pastel dresses, smiling and greeting one another with hugs and air kisses. It was all so beautiful, so elegant, so performative. I scanned the crowd, eyes flitting over faces, looking for anyone I recognized. There was Stephanie, of course. She was front and center in a lavender dress, her arm looped through the elbow of a man I didn't know. She looked serene, composed, every inch the gracious stepmother of the bride. But my father was nowhere. I leaned closer to the screen, thinking maybe I'd missed him. Maybe he was just outside the camera's frame, giving instructions to the staff or greeting late arrivals. But the minutes ticked on, and still no sign of him. No familiar silver hair, no tailored suit, no stoic expression trying too hard to look joyful. And then I noticed someone else was missing too. Tomas. My breath caught in my chest. My eyes darted from group to group, scanning with increasing urgency. He wasn't there, not among the guests, not seated off to the side, not even standing at the back pretending to be invisible. If he'd arrived early, like he said, where was he? The music changed Vivaldi now, louder, more grand. The officiant stepped forward. Guests settled into their seats. A hush fell over the space, broken only by the rustling of chiffon and the occasional cough, and then Natalie appeared. She looked stunning. There was no denying it. Her dress clung in all the right places, the train cascading behind her like a waterfall of lace. She smiled as she took her first steps down the aisle, arm in arm with the same unfamiliar man who had stood beside Stephanie. And still, no father of the bride. I stared, frozen, watching my sister walk toward a future I was never meant to be part of, flanked by people who had rewritten the past without me in it. The officiant began his welcome, speaking of love and family and unity. I barely heard the words. My eyes kept scanning the background, the edges of the frame, looking for movement, a glimpse of a face I recognized, a clue. That's when I noticed something else. Near the back, just beyond the rows of seated guests, stood a man holding a tablet. He wasn't filming, he was watching. Watching the crowd, not the couple. He wore a black earpiece, and every few seconds, he spoke into a microphone clipped to his collar. Security, maybe. But why would a wedding like this need private security? My stomach turned. Something was off. The camera angle shifted slightly as the ceremony moved forward. Zachary looked nervous but happy. Natalie beamed up at him, glowing with anticipation. The officiant spoke about lifelong commitment, about promises and honesty and truth. I almost laughed out loud. Truth, there was so little of it here. And then, something strange happened. The camera glitched, not just a lag, but a stutter, a hiccup in the stream. The video skipped a second, then two. Natalie's head turned mid-smile, as if someone had called out her name. Then the picture froze. No sound, no movement. Just a frozen image of my sister, half-turned, her smile starting to falter. I waited, heart pounding, staring at the unmoving screen. I refreshed the page. Nothing. Checked my internet connection. It was fine. My cursor hovered over the tab like it might spark the feed back to life. But it didn't. And that silence, the digital kind, the kind that follows a blackout, rang louder than any scream. They were there. My family, my boyfriend, my sister. And I wasn't just excluded. I was being kept in the dark. On purpose. For a moment, nothing moved. The screen had frozen on Natalie's face, half-turned, her expression shifting from joy to something I couldn't quite name. The audio had cut out completely. No violins, no vows, just dead silence. I sat frozen myself, staring at the screen, willing it to restart, to blink, to do anything. Then it did. The video jumped, no fade, no warning, just a flicker, and suddenly the angle had changed. It was a wide shot now, from the back of the aisle, capturing the whole gathering from behind. The bride and groom were no longer in view, but the guests remained, some still seated, others standing, all craning their necks toward something just out of frame. And then I saw him. Thomas. Sitting there, in the third row, surrounded by my father, Stephanie, and two men I didn't recognize. His head was turned slightly to the side, as if he had just said something to the woman next to him. He laughed. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like he belonged. He was supposed to be in Chicago. He had left the apartment that morning in jeans and a hoodie. No suitcase, no suit, no mention of a flight, a drive, a plan. He'd said he was just stepping out for coffee. But there he was, dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt. Tie perfectly knotted, hair neatly combed, not a trace of hesitation in his posture. No guilt, no anxiety, just ease. The image lasted no more than 3 seconds before the screen went black again. I blinked, breath caught in my throat, unsure if I'd really seen what I thought I had. I refreshed the stream. Nothing. I reopened the page in a new tab. Still blank. I checked the event's social media account. Comments were already piling up. Anyone else lose the feed? What's going on? It just cut out, right when things were getting good. But I didn't care about the bride or the ceremony anymore. I wasn't watching for the champagne toast or the floral arrangements. I had been watching to catch a glimpse of what I'd been pushed away from, and what I saw felt like a blade between my ribs. It wasn't just that Thomas was there. It was where he was sitting. In the family section. 3 rows from the front. Sitting beside my father, like they had always been allies. Like I hadn't been living with a man who had spent months pretending to be indifferent about a wedding he now appeared to be celebrating. He was one of them. I sat back in my chair, suddenly aware of how cold my apartment felt. The hum of the fridge behind me, the quiet ticking of the clock, the stillness of the air it all pressed in, heavy and suffocating. A different kind of silence this time. Not from a frozen live stream, but from the slow, shattering comprehension of betrayal. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had a last-minute change of plans. Maybe he just wanted to show support. Maybe he thought I wouldn't mind. But the lies unraveled faster than I could patch them. If it were innocent, why hide it? Why lie about Chicago? Why sneak out? Why take a seat next to the very people who had pushed me out? And worst of all, why did he look so at home? My phone buzzed. A text from an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in months. Hey random, I think I just saw Thomas at a wedding livestream on Facebook. Someone shared it? Thought he was out of town? The screen blurred. I realized I was shaking. It was all true. He'd gone behind my back. He'd lied. And he'd done it not just with indifference, but with comfort, like he had been doing it for longer than I could imagine. And what cut deepest wasn't the fact that Thomas had gone. It was that everyone there had let him. My father, Stephanie, Natalie, they all knew I wouldn't be there. They knew I would be watching from afar, powerless to do anything. They knew that if they kept me at a distance, they could control what I saw. But they didn't count on the camera angle changing. They didn't count on my eyes catching his. They didn't count on me seeing what they worked so hard to keep hidden. In that one frozen frame, everything snapped into place. The distance, the strange phone calls, the cryptic business talk, the forwarded wedding email, the deal I was never supposed to know, existed. I didn't know exactly what they were all hiding, but now I was sure they were hiding it together, and I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The image of Thomas sitting beside my father at Natalie's wedding replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't stop. I barely slept that night. My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. I tried to convince myself that there had to be an explanation, but explanations require truth, and truth had become a rare currency in my world. By morning, I wasn't angry, I was clear. Clarity is a strange gift after betrayal. It sharpens everything. I knew I couldn't trust what Thomas told me. I couldn't trust what my father showed me. But I could still trust what people chose to post. People always reveal more than they intend to online. I opened my laptop and started with the obvious. Natalie's social media accounts. She was meticulous, curated. The kind of person who edited every caption and filtered every image. Her Instagram was a gallery of her perfect life, brunches, bridal showers, soft lighting. I scanned post after post, digging not just into the images, but the tags, the comments, the timestamps. 3 weeks before the wedding, there it was, a photo of Natalie at a wine tasting. She stood beside Stephanie, holding a glass of white, both smiling. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was Thomas. My breath caught. He wasn't tagged. She hadn't mentioned him in the caption. But it was him, shoulders slightly turned, one hand in his pocket, sunglasses pushed up onto his head. He had told me he was in Denver that weekend for a startup conference. He even forwarded me a flight confirmation. I opened my calendar to double-check. Same weekend. I kept scrolling. Another post, 2 days later. This time, a selfie Natalie took with Stephanie in front of a white stucco building. In the reflection of the window behind them, a man was stepping out of a black car. Again, Thomas. I moved on to Stephanie's page. Hers was less public, but a few tagged photos from friends were visible. One from a fundraising gala, dated 6 weeks prior. Stephanie stood beside a group of sharply dressed attendees. My father wasn't in the shot, but Thomas was. Standing near the edge, drink in hand, chatting with a man I recognized from a press release on my father's real estate firm's website. The caption read, "Big moves ahead for RW Holdings." Thomas had been at the gala. A gala I hadn't even known existed. I pulled up my search history and opened the RW Holdings website. It was sleek, minimal, overly polished, just like my father. I browsed the team bios. Thomas's name wasn't there. No mention of him as a partner, advisor, or consultant. But when I went to the investor section and dug deeper, I found a link at the bottom of a press release labeled Affiliate Ventures. I clicked. There it was, buried in a paragraph. TE Ventures to advise on upcoming vineyard redevelopment proposal in partnership with RW Holdings, effective post Q3. TE Ventures. Thomas Evans. Everything clicked at once. The vineyard wasn't just a wedding venue. It was part of a larger financial strategy, a front for something bigger. My father's company had likely acquired the land or was preparing to, and Thomas, under his own venture, was involved in the advisory process. And none of them had told me. Not Thomas, not my father, not even Natalie. I sat back in my chair, stunned. How long had this been going on? How long had they kept me on the outside, feeding me pieces of information only when it suited them? I had spent years thinking I was simply forgotten. But this wasn't just forgetting. This was omission, calculated, strategic. I stared at Thomas's face in the photos. That easy smile. That posture of familiarity. He had played his part well. Too well. I thought about the nights he told me he was tired from meetings, the business trips he said were last minute, the times he'd suggested I not bring up family during dinner, saying it only made me more upset. He hadn't been protecting me. He had been protecting himself, and whatever deal he was helping my father close. The betrayal felt wider now, less like a single wound and more like a web I'd walked into without seeing. They were all connected, all smiling, all shaking hands while I watched from behind a screen. It wasn't just that I'd been left out of a wedding. I'd been locked out of something bigger, something that involved money, property, perhaps even inheritance. And Thomas, the man I had trusted most, had been in on it the whole time. I stood and paced my apartment, heart pounding. I needed more. More proof. More answers. I couldn't confront anyone, yet not until I understood the full picture. Not until I could walk into a conversation armed with facts they couldn't twist. I opened a private browser window and began searching real estate records in New York State. Transactions, permit filings, vineyard acquisitions. Anything that might tie my father's company to the land the wedding had taken place on. Anything that might tie Thomas to it on paper. I had the names, I had the timeline. Now I just needed to find what they'd worked so hard to bury. Whatever they were building, I wasn't going to let them finish it without me seeing every brick. And if they thought the daughter they erased was going to stay silent, they were about to find out just how loud I could be. Thomas came home later than usual that evening. He walked through the door with a plastic bag of takeout and a look on his face like nothing had happened. That alone nearly pushed me over the edge. The ability to lie with such ease, to slip back into normal like everything hadn't cracked wide open, was something I hadn't realized he was capable of. He set the food on the kitchen counter and glanced over at me, sitting stiffly on the couch. "I got that spicy chicken you like," he said. I didn't respond. He turned. "Rebecca?" I looked at him and asked, without raising my voice, "How long have you been working for my father?" His face didn't flinch. Not at first. Just a slight drop in the corner of his mouth. The smallest pause in his breath. That was all I needed. He set the bag down slowly. "I was going to tell you." I stood up. "When? Before or after you sat next to him at my sister's wedding and smiled for the camera?" He exhaled through his nose and rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when he was cornered. But this time, I wasn't going to let him maneuver his way out. "Just tell me the truth," I said. "I deserve that much." He nodded, slowly. "It started after your mom died. Your dad. He was worried about you. Said you were slipping away. You distanced yourself. Stopped answering calls. He thought you might spiral." I stared at him, my voice sharp now. "So he sent you to monitor me? Like I was a project?" "He didn't say it like that," Thomas replied, suddenly defensive. "He introduced us. Arranged for us to meet at that gallery opening. I didn't know who you were at first. But when I found out, yes, he asked me to keep an eye on you, to make sure you were okay." I took a step back. "And the relationship? Was that part of the assignment too?" His silence told me everything. I laughed once, short, bitter. "How long were you going to keep this up? Until the deal went through? Until you cashed your check?" "It wasn't like that, Rebecca." His voice cracked a little. "At first it was. Weird, yes. But I fell for you. I swear I did." I shook my head. "So you just forgot to mention that my father was paying you while you slept in my bed? You forgot to mention that our entire relationship was built on surveillance and manipulation?" He tried to come closer, but I held up a hand. "Don't." He stopped. "The vineyard," I said. "The redevelopment, the fake investor meetings. Was I just the bridge between the family name and your financial gain?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "The family wanted to consolidate assets. Your dad thought keeping you close would make things cleaner. If your name was involved in the paperwork, if things ever got complicated, he'd have leverage, legal options. So I wasn't just being watched," I said. "I was being positioned. Used." He looked down at the floor. I sat back down, not out of weakness, but because the weight of it all made standing suddenly feel absurd. Every conversation we'd ever had, every shared weekend, every kiss, none of it felt untouched anymore. It was all connected to this grotesque arrangement, this carefully constructed lie I'd mistaken for love. "My mother hated him," I said quietly. "I never knew why. I thought it was about the affair. But now I see it. She saw what he was capable of. She saw what he'd do to protect his image, his power. And now I'm just another transaction in his portfolio." "I didn't want it to end this way," Thomas said. "It started this way," I replied. He didn't speak after that. He stood there for a while, like maybe the right words would come to him if he waited long enough. But there were no words left that could make any of it right. I looked at him one last time, and I wasn't even sure who I was looking at anymore. Not my partner, not my confidant, just another man who saw me as a tool, as a means to an end. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be erased from your own life. Not forgotten, rewritten. I didn't cry after Thomas left. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel the heat of anger anymore. What settled inside me that night was something colder, quieter, an unshakable determination. I had been lied to, used, and positioned like a pawn in someone else's game. But I wasn't going to stay in that role. Not anymore. I began my investigation the next morning, not with revenge in mind, but with clarity. I needed answers. Real answers. Not filtered through Thomas's mouth or hidden in boardroom slides. I started where I knew it would hurt them most. Money. My father's company, RW Holdings, had always been something of a mystery to me. A real estate conglomerate, yes, but its specifics, vague at best. I began digging into publicly available documents, state filings, property acquisitions, and tax disclosures. A pattern began to emerge. Properties purchased at inflated prices and sold under shell companies. Vineyard and resort developments with shared addresses. Licensing deals that seemed to involve Thomas's venture firm, TE Ventures, at suspiciously perfect intervals. More than once, I ran into roadblocks, documents marked as private, deals that seemed to disappear mid-year, companies that existed only for a single transaction, and then vanished. This wasn't disorganization, it was intentional. A maze built to confuse, to mislead. And I had lived my whole adult life oblivious to the walls surrounding me. It was around that time that I remembered Maria. Maria Vega had been my mother's closest friend for years. I remembered her warm laugh and thick accent, her quick wit, and the quiet sadness in her eyes at my mother's funeral. After that, we lost touch. My father never mentioned her, and at the time, neither did I. But now, I wondered if anyone had seen what I had missed. It would be her. I found her number through an old contact in my mother's alumni circle and called without thinking twice. When she answered, there was a long pause after I introduced myself. "Rebecca," she said gently. "You sound like your mother." Those 5 words nearly broke me. We met that afternoon in a quiet cafe outside town. Maria looked older, of course, but no less sharp. Her eyes softened as she looked at me. I didn't need to say much, just that I had questions about my mother, my family, and what had been hidden from me. Maria didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, yellowed at the edges. "Your grandmother trusted me," she said. "She asked me to hold on to these in case your father tried something." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies of legal documents, land deeds, account statements, trust documents, and at the very top, a will. A handwritten codicil attached to it read, in my grandmother's cursive, "In the event of my passing, Rebecca Miller shall retain full control of the estate unless she is proven mentally or legally unfit." I stared at the words. This wasn't just paperwork. It was protection. My grandmother had ensured I would inherit her estate, her vineyard, her accounts, everything. And somehow, none of it had ever reached me. Maria explained what she knew. After my grandmother passed away when I was 19, my father had taken control as executor. He had presented a different version of the will, one that named him as the primary trustee. With my mother gone and me away at school, there had been no one to challenge him. He claimed I wanted nothing to do with the estate, that I had waived my rights. He forged my signature. My hands trembled as I sifted through the pages. Some had notations in my grandmother's handwriting. Some bore witness stamps from an attorney Maria remembered meeting. These were real, original copies, ones never submitted to probate. My inheritance had been stolen from me, my life rewritten, first emotionally, then financially. And Thomas? He had known. The redevelopment of the vineyard, the place where Natalie's wedding had taken place, was part of my inheritance. It had been stripped from me, disguised as a family event, then packaged into a lucrative business deal. And the man I loved had stood shoulder to shoulder with the man who stole it from me. It wasn't just betrayal. It was fraud. I looked at Maria. "Can this hold up legally?" She nodded. "If you move quickly, and if you're ready to fight." I was. No more asking for a seat at the table. I was going to burn the whole table down. I didn't make an appointment. I didn't call ahead. I walked straight through the glass doors of RW Holdings that morning like I owned the place, because, in some ways, I did. Or at least, I was about to prove that I should have. The receptionist barely looked up as I passed. The elevator opened like it had been waiting. Floor 28, the executive level. His office sat at the end of the hall, just as it had for years. But I had never entered it like this before. I had never arrived with the truth on my side. When the door opened, my father was sitting behind his mahogany desk, typing an email. He looked up, surprised, then annoyed. "Rebecca," he said, trying to summon warmth into his voice. "What are you doing here?" I closed the door behind me. "We need to talk." He gestured to a chair across from him. "If this is about the wedding." "It's not." I dropped the folder on his desk, the same folder Maria had handed me days earlier. It landed with a heavy thud, and I saw the flicker in his eyes. Recognition. Fear. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. "Everything you didn't want me to see," I said. "The real will. The property records, the trust documentation, Grandma's handwritten codicil." He didn't open the folder. He didn't need to. I continued. "You knew exactly what she intended. You knew Mom wanted me to inherit everything. And you knew I would never agree to sell or restructure the estate. That's why you kept it from me. That's why you forged my signature. You've been laundering assets through TE Ventures, using Thomas as a front, and now you've wrapped it all up in a vineyard deal disguised as a wedding." He didn't deny it. He leaned back, hands folded in front of him, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then calmly, "How much do you want?" It took me a second to register what he was saying. "I'm offering you a settlement," he clarified. "A generous one. You walk away, and I'll have the papers drawn up. You won't have to worry about anything for the rest of your life." I stared at him. "You stole everything from me, and you think I'm here to negotiate? It's not about negotiation, Rebecca. It's about moving forward." "I'm not the one who needs to move forward," I said. "I'm the one you left behind." The door opened behind me. I turned to find Stephanie stepping in, perfectly composed, silk scarf draped around her neck, like this was just another charity luncheon. "Well," she said, "I assume the truth is out." "I know what you did," I said. "I know you convinced him to suppress the will. I know you told him my mother never trusted me, that I couldn't handle responsibility." Stephanie tilted her head, amused. "Your mother was sentimental. She thought blood alone made someone worthy." I disagreed. "You mean she thought I was her daughter, and you wanted to make sure I paid for that?" She smiled, just barely. "You were always a problem, Rebecca. Not loud, not dramatic, just inconvenient. And frankly, I thought Thomas would be enough to keep you quiet." My hands clenched at my sides. "You thought wrong." My father stood now. "Rebecca, listen to me. This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is," I said. He stepped closer. "You're my daughter." "No," I replied. "I'm your liability." They thought I came here to bargain. They still didn't understand. "I'm not walking away," I told them. "I'm going to court. I'm going to the press if I have to. You forged legal documents. You buried my inheritance. You used my partner to spy on me. This ends now." Stephanie's mask cracked for the first time. "You destroy your own family?" "You destroyed it," I said. "I'm just turning on the lights." I left them standing there, surrounded by the ruins they'd built with lies. For years, I thought I was the outsider in my own family. But now, I saw the truth. They hadn't pushed me out. They'd been trying to erase me. But I was still here, and I was done being quiet. I filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday. There was no dramatic courtroom scene yet, just a carefully prepared stack of documents delivered to the county clerk's office by my attorney, Linda Hayes, a sharp, quietly forceful woman who didn't flinch when I told her my father's name. She took one look at the files Maria had given me and said, "He's going to regret underestimating you." By Friday, a formal complaint had been submitted to the state's Office of Legal Affairs. By Monday, the press got wind of it. They started small local finance blogs, a regional news outlet, but the story was too rich to ignore. Daughter of real estate mogul accuses father of financial fraud, forgery, and inheritance theft. Names like RW Holdings and TE Ventures started to pop up in headlines. I didn't have to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. My father, the man who had built a reputation around legacy, structure, and clean business, was suddenly a name associated with fraud. And it wasn't just a media nightmare, it was a legal one. The original will from my grandmother, the property transfers, the forged signature, it was enough to trigger a formal audit by the state's Financial Crimes Unit. But the real shock came 2 weeks later. Linda called me, her voice unusually tense. "You should sit down." RW Holdings had lost 3 of its largest investors. Quiet exits, no public statements. But the message was clear. They were cutting ties. The 4th and 5th came days later, major banks and a private capital firm that had worked with my father for over a decade. One of them leaked their reasoning to the media. We cannot continue a partnership with an organization under serious legal scrutiny involving allegations of financial misconduct, forgery, and misrepresentation of inheritance claims. That statement hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just that they were walking away, it was that they were saying, without apology, that my story was credible. Behind the scenes, it only got worse for him. Internal emails were subpoenaed. Several deals he'd made with shell companies traced back to entities co-managed by Thomas, who had since gone quiet, no longer answering texts or emails. RW Holdings' board of directors called an emergency meeting. Rumors swirled about removal, about collapse. Stephanie, of course, stayed quiet, but a leaked voicemail from her to a former family friend circulated online, her voice sharp, panicked, blaming Richard for not being careful enough and letting the girl dig too deep. The girl, that's what I'd always been to them. A girl they could exclude from the wedding. A girl they could use to legalize a deal. A girl they could silence with a check. They didn't see me as a threat until it was too late. But the most painful part wasn't watching my father's empire shake, it was watching him pretend it wasn't. I saw him once during the early fallout, crossing the lobby of RW's building, sunglasses on, suit perfect. But his stride had changed. He moved slower. He was looking over his shoulder. The man who once controlled everything was now trying to hold together the pieces of a story he no longer owned. Meanwhile, I received messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. An old colleague from college. Saw the news. Good for you. A former assistant of my father's. We always knew something was off. Even a journalist wrote, "If you ever want to tell your story in your own words, we'll make space." But I wasn't doing this for headlines. I wasn't doing it for revenge anymore either. I was doing it to reclaim something that had always been mine, not just the land or the assets, but my name, my voice, my place. Because when you've been erased by people who claim to love you, the most radical thing you can do is prove you were always there. And now, the world was finally starting to see it. When the news broke, it didn't begin with a bang. It started with a leak. A whistleblower anonymous, but later speculated to be a disgruntled former associate, sent a cache of internal emails, financial statements, and draft contracts to several major media outlets. Within hours, what had once been speculation became undeniable fact. The documents confirmed everything: false reporting, undisclosed holdings, cross-collateralized debts hidden under shell entities, and forged beneficiary transfers. And at the center of it all, Thomas Evans. His name appeared on every document that mattered: joint advisor roles with RW Holdings, forged asset evaluations, and internal memos recommending preemptive silencing of potential inheritance claims. He wasn't a bystander. He was a primary actor. Within 24 hours of the leak, every remaining contract under TE Ventures was frozen. Partner firms issued statements distancing themselves. Investors demanded audits. His face disappeared from company websites. LinkedIn scrubbed. Social media locked. A popular finance blog ran the headline, "The Golden Boy Who Gambled It All and Lost." But it was worse than a fall from grace. It was obliteration. Thomas released a statement. Bland, legal, something about regret, cooperation, and truth in time. But no one cared. His silence had spoken too loudly, for too long. And now the crowd had turned. But it wasn't just Thomas. In the second wave of fallout, more documents emerged: emails between Stephanie and Richard, flagged by auditors now combing through RW Holdings systems. One in particular drew attention. Dated 2 years earlier, it read, "She'll never understand what this family needs. She was her mother's weakness, not ours. The sooner we bury the old woman's intentions, the better." It was signed, Stephanie. The backlash was swift. Stephanie, who had spent years positioning herself as a philanthropic powerhouse, was forced to resign from 2 nonprofit boards within a week. A third released a public letter condemning her disregard for basic ethical integrity. Photos of her smiling at the Vineyard wedding now reappeared in editorials about greed, manipulation, and legacy laundering. And then came Natalie. Up to that point, she'd largely escaped the public's attention. Young, newly married. The face of innocence in a storm. But more messages surfaced: screenshots of conversations, one in which she asked her mother how to ensure Rebecca never gets wind of the trust stuff. Another from months before the wedding. Dad said he'd handle it. She'll watch from the sidelines, like always. Rebecca. Sidelines. The world didn't like that. Suddenly, Natalie's face wasn't a bridal symbol anymore. It was a smirk plastered beside headlines like Sister of Silence and When Blood Isn't Family. Her husband's startup dropped 10% in valuation in a single week after social media campaigns called for investors to reconsider backing a family tied to scandal. Public sympathy had shifted. Not for Richard, not for Stephanie, not for Natalie, but for me. I never asked for that spotlight. I never wanted it. But now that it was here, I used it carefully. I gave one interview, just one, a taped segment for a national morning show. I told the truth, plainly. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I simply explained what had been done and what I had chosen to do in response. That restraint made it more powerful. Viewers called in by the hundreds. Emails poured into the show's inbox, not just from women, but from men, parents, grown children, people who had been disinherited, disrespected, dismissed, people who understood what it meant to be erased and what it took to fight your way back into your own story. For every fall my family took, I rose a little further, not with pride, but with peace. I didn't need to celebrate Thomas's collapse. I didn't need to see Stephanie's name scrubbed from every gala invite. I didn't need to watch Natalie's public persona unravel. What I needed, what I finally had, was the truth. Out in the open, unshakable, undeniable, mine. 6 months later, the court ruled in my favor. The original will was upheld. The forged documents were nullified. My grandmother's estate, long buried beneath false claims and manipulations, was restored to its rightful heir. To me, I was awarded full ownership of the vineyard, the family land, and the liquid assets my father had hidden behind shell companies and fake trusts. But when the judge read the verdict, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. It wasn't about the money. It had never really been about the money. It was about being heard, being seen, being acknowledged, not as a burden or an inconvenience, but as someone who mattered, someone who had always mattered, even if they tried to erase me. When the news was made official, I didn't hold a press conference. I didn't post anything online. I went home, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in silence. Not because I was empty, but because I was full for the first time in years with a peace I could trust. But that peace came with clarity, because I knew I wasn't the only one. My story had sparked something. Since the interview aired, I'd received hundreds of messages, letters from people who'd been left out of wills, discredited by stepfamilies, manipulated into signing away everything by people they thought they could trust. They didn't just want to congratulate me. They wanted help. And I realized I could give it to them. I used a portion of the settlement to create something my family would never have imagined, a nonprofit legal fund dedicated to supporting individuals cut out of their family's inheritance due to manipulation, abuse, or fraud. I named it Second Testament. Our first clients came quietly. A woman in her 60s who'd been left out of her father's will after her brother revised it during a hospital stay. A man whose grandmother's estate had been swallowed by a religious cult his uncle had joined. A young woman who'd been told, like me, that she wasn't family enough. They all walked in with the same look I had once carried. The look of someone trying to prove they exist. And we helped them do just that. Meanwhile, my father's empire crumbled piece by piece. Legal fees mounted. His name, once a pillar in real estate circles, became a cautionary tale. Stephanie divorced him quietly, without public comment. Natalie moved out of state, avoiding reporters and former friends alike. They had each other, for what little that was worth now. A family built on deception had nothing to hold it together when the lies fell apart. But I wasn't watching them anymore. I had moved into the vineyard house. It wasn't grand or modern, but it was peaceful. The porch overlooked the fields, and the oak trees still whispered when the wind passed through them, just like they did when I was a girl. Back when I still believed family meant something unbreakable. Now, I knew better. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who defends your name when you're not in the room. It's who believes your story before it's proven. It's who stays when everything else falls away. I wasn't alone anymore. I had built something that mattered. I had rewritten my story, not as a victim, not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman who stood up when it counted. I didn't need a last name to define me. I had earned something greater. And somewhere deep in the quiet of that vineyard, I could almost hear my mother's voice again. She wasn't saying, "I'm proud of you." She was saying, "I always knew." And finally, so did I. If you've made it to the end of Rebecca's story, thank you for staying with her through every betrayal, every twist, and every step toward justice. Stories like hers aren't just fiction, they reflect the pain, silence, and strength many carry but rarely voice. If this story moved you, or if you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or erased by those who should have protected you, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Rebecca's place? Do you believe forgiveness is possible after a betrayal that deep? And if you want to see more stories that reveal the dark truths behind perfect family portraits and show how resilience rewrites the ending, make sure you subscribe. Each week, we bring you powerful tales of justice, reckoning, and strength you won't find anywhere else. Let your voice be part of this community because some stories deserve to be heard all the way through.